Hi, my name is Robyn Burgess. I'm a sewist and founder of Styles and Seams, a fit-obsessed sewing blog for anyone looking to create clothes of their own. Today, I'm sharing an exclusive sneak peek of a lesson about mastering some important sewing basics. Ready to get started? Now that you know how to set up your machine, let's start stitching seams. Seams are basically when you take two pieces of fabric and make them into one so that they're one solid. You have seams at your sides, you have seams at your shoulders, you have seams wherever you're trying to make a shape with some fabric. So they're super essential to sewing. We're gonna keep it super low stakes here and stick with the practice fabric. I want you to use something that you do not care about, like something you've upcycled, something that would be trash. Basically, we're gonna recycle something into fabric that you can practice stitches on so that you don't get frustrated when you maybe mess it up. The key here is to go and practice and get good at it before we move on to your good fabric. So grab a little bit of scrap fabric and let's get started. So first things first, when you're sewing two pieces of fabric together, in almost every case you want to put right sides together. If your fabric has a print, it'll be easy to tell which is the right side. If it doesn't have a print, it might be a little bit harder, but just choose the side that you want to be the wrong side and go ahead and mark it so that you stay consistent. Next thing that I want to do before I start stitching is get a little bit of practice with using pins to hold the two pieces of fabric together before I put them under my machine. So I have some pins here. If you are going to ever be ironing with pins, it's good to invest in some glass head pins because they won't melt under the heat of the iron. We're going to take our pins and we're going to add them to the seam that we're going to stitch to hold the pieces together so that they stay aligned when we put them under the presser foot. The most important thing when pinning is to have the pin going perpendicular to your seam. Because if you do it parallel, what will happen is your fabric will bunch up a little bit like this, and you won't be able to keep it straight and good. The other thing is when you're keeping it perpendicular, it's good to have it so that they face out in the direction that is the outside of the seam. That way it's going to be easy to pull those pins out as you sew. As you get more confident with sewing, you might not have to use as many pins, but it's perfectly okay to put a bazillion pins in your garment. It'll take a little more time, but it'll get the results you want. One of the most important concepts in sewing is maintaining seam allowance. Seam allowance is the amount of distance between where the stitch line goes and the edge of the fabric. In a lot of patterns, you'll see a seam allowance of anywhere from 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter up to 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to show you how to figure out how much seam allowance you have on your machine. What I want you to do is lift up your presser foot and just take it off. Then grab a small ruler, in this case I'm using a seam guide, and rotate your needle so that it's almost down. Now you just want to measure the distance from where the needle position is to where it says 5/8 of an inch. The reason why I'm doing this is because different machines have different needle positions, and sometimes the marking and the placement of that 5/8 of an inch seam is different. For me, stitch number 00 is 5/8 of an inch. This is the stitch where the needle is in the leftmost position. But if I put that needle down and bring it back up, and say I were to choose number 1, where the needle goes in the middle part of the throat plate, and measure it, I would find that it's actually been moved over by 1/8 of an inch, and now it's only 1/2 of an inch from that 5/8 line. You don't have to do that every time. It's just good to do it the first couple of times so that you remember the right needle position for getting a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. The seam allowance will be so important when it comes around to using a pattern to sew a garment. Garments are designed and the pattern is made with a certain amount of seam allowance. So it's important that you remain consistent that whole time, otherwise your garment will end up too small or too big. Your points might not match up, and you effectively will be sewing something outside of the design that's intended. Let's put our presser foot back on and get our fabric under there. Now that I know that this line on my machine here is aligned with 5/8 of an inch and I'm going for a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to go back down to stitch 0 and place the fabric under the presser foot. Remember that you have pins in here, and needles and pins don't like each other. So what we're going to do is remove the pins as we sew just before we get to where the pin is, to make sure that we're not going to break our needle. Broken needles are an inevitability when it comes to sewing, but let's avoid them where we can. I'm going to drop the needle and pay very close attention to the first couple of things that I do. First, I'm just going to get rid of this first pin, get it out of the way. Whenever you start to sew a seam, what you want to do is start your stitches, back stitch a little bit, and then keep going. That back stitch is going to secure your stitches in place because it goes this way and then back that way and back this way over the stitches that you originally done, and it gets it nice and secured and locked in place. So to start that, I'm just going to press my presser foot and do, say, 3 stitches. Nice and slow. 1, 2, 3. Now on my machine, I have a button that does a back stitch. So I'm going to press that. 1, 2, 3. So now that we've back stitched at the beginning, let's sew the seam and then back stitch at the end. If you just hold down the back stitch, it'll go for 3 slow stitches. Just watch them and then go forward again. Lift up your needle, lift up your presser foot, cut it off. We have our seam allowance, which is about 5/8 of an inch. We have our stitching line, or our seam line, and then this is the wrong side of the fabric. So what does that look like on the right side of the fabric? When you open it out, you should see a pretty clean line. You will see a little bit of perforation where you see all of those stitches going through the fabric, but if you've done a nice tight stitch, which is the right size for your fabric, it should not be too noticeable or too much of a problem. You can test the strength of your seam by just pulling at it, yanking at it. What may happen is you'll see that the fabric doesn't like being pulled. That might be a good sign that you need some interfacing, or maybe you need to do a smaller stitch just to be a little bit more secured on the fabric that you've chosen. But it's nice and strong here. It may be a little bit difficult for a new sewist to keep the fabric going straight, but remember, the presser foot and the feed dogs are moving the fabric for you. You don't need to push it, you don't need to pull it, you basically barely touch it and slightly guide it. But there's some more stuff that you can do if you want to make sure that you're keeping a good straight line. One thing you can do is take some tape and put it down here on your machine on the line that you want to follow. This is somewhat helpful when you're doing a tight seam that's marked here, but if you needed to do a really wide one that isn't marked, you could also use the tape to keep that consistent. So now, and I'll just show with the same fabric, when I put the fabric on here, I have even more to watch. Instead of watching up by the needle, I can make sure that it's staying right up next to this line through the whole length of this scrap. So now that you've learned about how to stitch a seam, let's actually talk about how to do different types of stitches on the seam. The first we're going to do is basting. Basting is when you use long machine stitches to sew something. Basting is really helpful because it allows you to sew stitches that you can easily remove with a seam ripper. They can be temporary or they can be permanent, but let me show you some basting stitches and show you how easy it is to take them out. To set yourself up for sewing basting stitches, you want to put the fabric under, drop the presser foot, but what you need to do is increase the length of your stitches. So right now we've just been going off of the factory setting, which is whatever happens when you turn your machine on. Now we're going to get a little bit more intentional about the length that we choose. So on my machine, the length setting is right here. I can move these plus and minus buttons in order to choose how long I want the length to be. So right now, let's hit the plus and go as high as we can go. Most machines max out at 5.0. I'm going to stitch the seam so you can see exactly what 5.0 looks like. So these are basting stitches, which is a 5.0 length. And if we compare this to the stitches that we did at the 2.5 length, we can see that they're much longer. When we baste, we don't usually want to backstitch at the beginning and the end, and we'll talk about that in a second. But what we do want is the ability to easily remove those stitches. So let me show you a device that we use to remove stitches. It's called a seam ripper. And a lot of sewists talk about how the seam ripper is the big bad, how they hate having to use one. But I actually think this is your friend. It allows you to practice something, to sew it in a temporary stitch, and then easily remove it. Just so easily, you can take these and pull out these stitches. And because I didn't backstitch at start and stop in order to secure my stitches, I can take this thread and I can pull it together, or I can pull it all the way out. Remove the bobbin thread, and that seam is gone. Now it's your turn. You know how to do stitches, you know how to do seams, so play around with some different test fabrics and have at it. Thanks for joining me for this lesson. This was one part of my Fundamentals of Sewing class on Skillshare. Join me in the full class to learn how to jump into sewing by creating a cute zippered purse step by step. Click the link below. I can't wait to see you there.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.